just a little bit. We thank you for joining us and welcome in to Jones County Heritage Days. I'm John Moore, and joining me right now, this young lady, if you will, Miss Eldridge Eubank. And Miss Eubank, how long have you been in Jones County?
We moved to Jones County when I was in the third grade.
Third grade. Now let me go back one step. Tell me what brought your family to Jones County.
Poverty, probably.
Really?
No.
Was that like during the Depression?
Yes, and it hasn't ended yet.
Oh, I'm going to love this interview. Tell me, in the third grade, did you realize what was going on, or did you think you were just moving? And tell me about what you remember in third grade moving to Jones County.
Well, I remember my teacher was Miss Kuntz from Comfort, and everybody loved her.
Right.
And one thing that stands out in my memory of that class was somebody gave her a big box of shoes, because everybody, we were not the only ones that were poor, it was everybody. And she had this big box of shoes, and she said that they were for us, they were about the size
right.
our grade would have used. Well, she came to me and wanted to give me a pair of shoes. Well, I said, I don't need a pair of shoes. Daddy fixed mine last night.
How about that?
He had this, what do you call it, in the way you put the shoe on it and
right.
it down. He had put a sole on all the new shoes. I wouldn't even take that.
So you had some new shoes. Let me ask you, what year was that? Do you remember what year that might have been? Because a lot of young folks in the third grade, they didn't realize that a depression was going on. It was just a way of life back then.
It was probably 29 or something.
29 or something.
I can't remember.
Miss Eubank, did you grow up on a farm from that point on?
From there on, yes.
Tell me about being a young person now and being on that farm. Now, we got a lot of young viewers that will follow this. And when you start talking about the things that you had to do on that farm, day to day, year in and year out, it was just work.
I just thought that we worked all the time, and I fussed about having so many jobs to do. And my dad said, well, keep a count of how much time you spend, and let's see how much work you do.
Right.
And that wasn't near as it didn't amount very much, but anyway, I was little and young and did whatever had to be done.
But didn't know it was work, it was just a part of life. Let me take you back to those summer days in Jones County, and it was hot, and those sand lugs and that tobacco had to be put in. Did you have a job around the tobacco barn then?
Yes,
Now you said that yes, gritting your teeth like, yes I did. You didn't like that, did you?
my first job was handing tobacco, but I soon graduated to the looping part. I liked that.
Like that looping part.
Yeah, it was a bigger job, I thought.
It would be in charge then. And then it comes time in the fall of the year would get here, and you start taking tobacco out, trying to get it ready for the warehouse. And then the work continued on in the pack house. Remember those days?
Yes, I remember. And our pack house burned. The lightning struck it and burned. Then they had to put the tobacco in the attic of the house. I remember that.
In your very house that you lived in.
Didn't have anywhere to put it because the pack house had burned. The lightning struck it. And I remember Mr. Charlton West, I don't know if anybody in here knows him or not, but he and one of his sons were coming by at the time the storm was coming up, and they stopped in at our house to go under the shelter out of the storm, where the lightning struck the barn that they were in.
Right.
One of their team died.
Oh, my gracious.
And another one fell, but did get up and survive.
Miss Eubank, as you go back and you look at those years and going to school and finishing school, Was there ever a time, and there had to be a time, you said, Lord, just get me off of this farm. Was there ever that time that you could share with us, that you just wanted to get somewhere else?
I liked, quiet.
Did you? Tell me about this now. I know that you had 3 wonderful children. Now tell me about, let's go past those years, and tell me about when you got grown and you started your adult life. Tell me about that, your family.
Well, I was 23, I think, when I got married. And then we had 3 children, and 2 of them in here. And one of my sons, the one that's back there, had polio when he was a baby.
Now that had to be in the 40s and 50s?
44.
Right, I remember that. I don't remember, but I remember studying it and hearing about it because they were still giving the vaccine as I was a young man. So you had 3 wonderful children, right? I want you to brag about them. Just tell them how great they are.
The best.
I know that. Tell me about that.
I just thought they were tops. I don't know. They never gave us a lot of trouble. We just had children, that's all.
Now, a lot of folks in Jones County, they went on to become teachers and do jobs, but you chose to be a mom, and I think that is an admirable thing. So tell me how it is today, because a lot of folks will never have the opportunity to do what you did and stay home and raise their children. And let me be fair, there is a difference between children that are raised in the home and those that go through daycare and all this. So there are a lot of people out there that are saying, Miss Eubank, you did the right thing, and you got to stay. You were fortunate to be able to stay home and raise your children. Now, you probably didn't feel that way when you were fixing 3 meals a day and doing all the doctoring and working on the farm and doing all that. But that had to be a great feeling for you to be able to do that.
It was wonderful. My oldest daughter taught school for a number of years, and the other 2 were boys, and they did various jobs, but farmed part of the time.
Right.
They neither one of them farming anymore, but I still live on the farm, same house, lived in for years. And let's see, what else do I know about my farming days?
The work got easier as you got a little older, I would imagine. It had to. It had to. Let me ask you this: your fondest memory, maybe, of being here in Trenton, in Jones County. Some friends, I asked people, do you remember the days of the church homecomings when people would go and what they were back in the day and things of that nature? Is there a fond memory that just sticks out with you with people gathering here in Jones County area?
Yes, we live real close to Maple Grove Church, close enough we could walk.
Right.
So anytime they opened the door, we went. And they had picnics, is what we call them.
Right.
Picnics in the summertime. I think it was June.
Right.
They used to have an annual thing.
Right.
And everybody would carry a picnic lunch, and then you shared it on
I know that was some
outdoor
good eating.
table.
I can see the jars of pickles right now. I mean, look, I've asked you all these things about Jones County. Now, we're just going to have us a one-on-one. I'm going to ask you some personal questions, very personal. They tell me that you really like the meal pond now. The meal pond just meant a lot to you. Tell me about that.
Well, at one time I worked in Trenton, and at lunchtime, there were several of the girls would go down to the mill pond and paddle a boat around
On
the
your
mill.
lunch hour.
Yeah. And I was selected as paddler. I didn't have sense enough to know that I was a job.
That's because you built those arms up looping that tobacco. That's why you became the paddler.
We paddled over the mill pond. That was fun. And then one year, I've forgotten what year it was, but, maybe like 40 or something like that. The mill pond froze over, and the children from school, because I think was out of school, but, the boys would run away from the school on the mill pond, because it was at the tail end of the school
Right.
yard. And a lot of us went to the mill pond to see it, because it was frozen. It was an unusual thing. And I remember everybody wanted their picture made on the water, on the ice.
Standing out there.
Well, they kept coming in one little spot. I thought to myself, I don't want a picture when I fall through this ice. Got back.
You be standing out
like
there.
a horse or something standing in one spot. But
Bishop,
it did break in, but I was afraid it would.
I knew you liked the mill pond. Gotta ask you this. Do you remember the first time you saw a television?
Yes, I do. It was at Mr.
Was it like a furniture store where they used to put them up in there and you could walk by them at night and see them playing? That's the way they used to do it in Farmville now.
John W. Creer had a business in Hollisville. And I remember he had a television in there. I sat in the car and looked, stared through the window. I remember that. That's a long time ago. I don't know how long ago it was.
We might be here all day. You remember the first time you took a real long trip from Trenton, like to Raleigh or somewhere? First real long trip. Remember that?
Well, the first time I went, the longest trip after I got home, but I went to Virginia on the bus.
And that was a trip, I bet.
And my father said, well, don't register your suitcase, take it with you. And when everybody else registered theirs, I registered mine too. And my suitcase got lost.
Now you know I should have listened to your daddy.
And that was somebody else. Oh, Jim.
As you look back, and a lot of young people are looking and they're hearing about the farming and the hard work and just they go in and they probably have 5 or 6 TVs in their home, and how you talk about your first TV and getting on a bus, so it's something you don't see that much anymore. If you could say anything to young people today about growing up, not only in Jones County, but growing up in those early years of this great country of ours, what would you say to somebody today about growing up in eastern North Carolina and Jones County? What would you say to those young people?
Well, I think the families, somebody mentioned it, I think it was Audrey, something about eating supper together.
Yes, ma'am.
Was it you, Audrey? Somebody today I heard talking about families used to eat supper together. Well, they mostly one at a time now. They stagger in and eat by themselves. But we used to sit at the table, everybody sat at the table.
It's supper time, and you were home at supper
Every day,
time.
just about, breakfast, noon, and supper. But it was something. I remember one thing that working, we had a field that went from the 58, and some of it was at the river.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, when we were working at the river field, you could hear the tugboats coming down the river.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't think you hear them anymore, but I can remember when they would tow a great long string of timber, of wood, of trees that were locked together some kind of way. And when it would get close enough, we'd run down and see it when it went by. Well, they had the men that would have to keep it punched away from the side of the river so it wouldn't hang up. They would walk on those logs, and that was interesting. I thought, oh my goodness, goodness gracious. But they were latched together some kind of way. They were all right, but
I got to get in a hurry interviewing you because I know we're going to be here when it's time to go to church in the morning. But I got to ask you this. Do you remember when you first got electricity in the country? Do you remember that?
I remember at our house, we got it later than some because we weren't next to it. I think Dad had to pay for it to be
Right.
come in there or something.
Can you remember hitting that switch and light coming on? That had to be like, oh my gracious.
Wonderful.
It has been a pleasure talking to you today, and I hope our young people that view this will take something away from this and being here in Jones County for Heritage Days and getting a chance to reminisce with folks like yourself. And one more question before we let you go. Did you ever have like a public job where you went every day and worked somewhere besides being at the farm?
I worked at J.C. Penney's in Gaston a while. It wasn't a very long time, but,
There's a lot of difference in working with the public and working on that farm, won't it?
yeah.
Bless your heart. I won't go any further than that. This New Bank has been our guest, and I hope you've learned something here today. I hope you find something to take away from this interview and think about the days of the meal pond, because it was such an important part of her life growing up here in Jones County. We'll continue in just a moment. You ready? Mr. Aldrin Kennedy. As we continue on with Jones County Heritage Days, we got a very special guest now. This gentleman has done a lot in his years, and we're going to start today and go way back with Mr. Aldrin Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, let's go back and talk about how did you get to Jones County? Did your family or did you move here? How did you get here?
Well, I was just thinking about staying over there. I've been connected, my life. I was born in Onslow County, moved to Lenoir County. It's connected, and I moved to Jones County. So I've been most of my life, my adult life, I've been in Jones County.
About what year did you get here, age-wise, for you, sir?
I come here in 1936, January 36.
So you were here right after the Depression. Were you old enough to remember the Depression, or were you a child and just heard folks talk about it at supper table?
Well, I know things were tough. A lot of people have been hungry.
Right.
And back then, everything was done by hand.
Yes, sir.
There was hardly no machinery at all. And people had it tough. And I won't call a man's name out because everybody knows him. A month ago, I was talking about that during the last Depression and everything, the women know how to cook clean fish and dress chickens and all this kind of stuff. And now that everybody goes to town and they buy it already prepared, all they got to do is put it in the oven and warm it up. And I said, if we had another Depression, people would starve to death because they wouldn't know how to fix the food. I said, they don't even know how to dress the chicken. The man said, what you talking about? My wife don't even know how to cook one.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of truth in what you said. Mr. Kennedy, let's go back, because I want to talk about Jones County being on the farm, going to school before you went off to the service. Tell me about going to school and working on the farm here in Jones County.
Well, the first experience I ever had in school was Onslow County, and I went there in the first grade.
Yes, sir.
It was a two-room building, 2 teachers, and they taught up to the 7th grade. No electricity. The only pump was a pump water, and outdoor Johnny's toilet, so what you want to call what we had there. And that when the winter time comes, they send the children out in the woods to pick up a lot of lighter knots and light in the woods, and that's where I started school at. And then I went to Seven Springs and went to Ballsfield School. And I went there one day and they had a movie, and I had never seen a movie. And they showed bananas and showed me how they fix cornflakes and stuff like that. And then in the following year, in 1935, we left there and come to Jones County, just down on the other side of Trimble, down around Sykes' Mill. And we stayed there 1 year, and we had hardship there. And the man felt sorry for us, and he had just bought land here in Jones County, right by Oak Grove Church, where Oak Grove Air Base is at there.
Yes, sir.
And we moved there in 1936. and stuff like then, people worked together. Like there was 8 heads in my family and other people worked. They didn't pay anybody anything. They would swap, you help me and I help you. There was a very little money paid. And we would go out and cut logs and stuff, cut up wood to fire the barn with, and you sit there all night and cure that wood. I know one time my daddy, and this was later on, and he went to work with the state, and my mother, and she didn't trust me to help cure tobacco. Me and her would cure tobacco at night. She was afraid it was time to go what's called go up on the heat. And she said, you stay up the first part of the night, and I'll stay up the last part of the night, because the last part is easy to get asleep. And so I stayed up my part and everything, and I called my mother, and she well, the next morning I woke up, the fire had gone out in the furnace, and she was laying up there asleep, and she jumped up, she heard me put the lid up to the furnace. She jumped up and said, I went to sleep then. And I said, you went to sleep, so when the fire had gone out, I had to make another fire.
Now, Mr. Kennedy, after you stayed up all night, curing the tobacco, if you didn't have your crop in, and most of the time you didn't, you had to go and put in the next day too.
Oh yeah, you put in the next day, but somebody had to fire that barn while you go out. It's close enough by, you go by and maybe every 45 minutes an hour and put more wood in that furnace.
Now, everybody was not allowed to fire a barn. Now, you had, you and even recently with these buck barns, I know folks that have not passed the reins over to their youngins yet. I mean, they're kind of peculiar about that.
Well, if you were old enough to pick up a log, you were able enough to put it in the furnace.
Okay.
So we started out working early, and like I told you, when we moved to Oak Grove over there, I was 11 years old, and I was little, but I had to reach up and get the plow hands to plow. And I think people stopped by and told I split such a middle, they wouldn't let me plow next to the crop, but I could do what they call split the middle now.
Yes, sir.
And stuff like that. And talking about old picnics, you was talking about a while ago, Oak Grove out there.
Yes, sir.
They had a picnic, I believe it was along about the 4th of July, and people everywhere, they crowed up and everywhere, they would come there. And Coca-Cola trucks would come out there and sit there all day long to sell Coca-Colas, and they'd have wash tubs and pick it up with ice and put the Coca-Colas in there and sell the drinks.
That's good stuff.
5 cents a piece for the Coca-Colas and everything.
I want to do this before I get to your military years, and this is more of a benefit for our young people. It's January. From January through Christmas, from the time you gas those beds till you got all your crops in it, and then you have to look after your pigs and chickens and all that. I don't think people understand just how much work, because we got to talk about splitting the wood, to keep warm with, to cook with, the whole 9 yards.
Well, that gas didn't come along to about 50.
Right.
What the people did then, they would go out and cut the wood down, trim up every leaf and everything, and grub stumps and roots out. And that's where you had tobacco bed, because out in the woods, there wasn't no grass there. And about every year, you cleaned up more than free. A lot of people cleaned up their land where they had tobacco bed. They cleaned another place out of the next year. That's where they kept cleaning land up. And you dig up the roots, the stumps and everything, and then you would put the cloth on it to keep it sewed and stuff like that. And then the women would go by, and most of the women would what they call pick the weeds and the things off of the bed that wasn't plants, and they picked it up like that.
And then somewhere along there, you had to take a day or two off and have a hog killing, so you'd have pork during the winter.
I don't know what a day was off on a Sunday.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. People didn't have an idea of how much work. Now, and then that tobacco comes off, you got to set it out, and then you got your corn to get out there. It was something all the time, and for an 11-year-old young'un, there was never, it was just unbelievable amount of work.
Not only that, when you carried it out, and you get out, you were talking about those sand lugs.
Yes, sir.
And you get out there, and somebody up over you, and down all that sand falls down on you, and all down your back, and everything, all over your clothes and everything. And then when you pack it down in the pack house, if you go back and grade it out, you pull every leaf that you pull out that field, you pull it out. You made it sometimes 4 or 5 different grades. You put the green, you put the red, you put the bright, and different colors in there.
And you remember how
you had it tied up and then pressed it down.
And how peculiar you were about handling that.
And everything. And they had what, grading sticks, and most of the grading sticks were hewed off by people by hand. They grade them sticks off.
And you would grade at night as long as you could, so it was from time to sun up just as hard as you could go. And this went on and on and on, and finally, you decided, I'm going in the military.
I did decide.
They decided for you?
They were drafted, and I was what they call SVU, Selected Volunteer.
What year was that, sir?
That was in 1944.
1944. So you saying, I'm gonna get off of this farm now, and I'm gonna go and be in the military?
Well, I didn't know nothing else. That's the only thing I'd ever knew.
Well, I would think that the military was kind of easy to somebody like yourself that had worked that hard on the farm.
Well, I tell you what, when we went to boot camp at Braintree, Maryland, we had to go through the obstacle course.
Yes, sir.
And I run it so fast until they wanted me to go back to it. They thought I had missed part of it because I had done everything they had done on the riverbank in Boston. And Mr. Eubanks was talking about the boats.
Yes, sir.
Before I come here, all the supplies that come up Trent River from Newbern, and they would take fertilizer and put it off at a place called Oliver Land, and they come but far up as Trenton, and all the supplies come in. A good friend of mine, James Harrod, he told me before he died a few years ago, the first car that his daddy got come in powerful in a crate, and they had to take it to Mason, someone another that knew about it, and put it together. And he come from Norfolk, Virginia. And when Miss Eubanks was talking about, when I come here at Oak Grove, Mr. Ransom Booth, there's a little narrow bridge that was just wide enough for one car. If you come up on the other side of another corner, you had to wait for him to go across. And it was a drawbridge, and I had never seen a drawbridge before. And when he lived next to the river, where we lived next to him, and
Yes, sir.
the base of that. And you could, when they get close to the ground, they would blow the horn on there, and he would know to go down there. Well, we boys would go down there swimming. We didn't have no bathing suits and everything, but where we was swimming at was maybe 500 or 600 yards.
Yes.
And the cars would come across, and we boys would be out there in the river swimming naked and everything. But what I was talking about, the boat would come down there, and we would go down there, and Mr. Ransom Booth, we'd beg him to let us help him. They would have a long pipe light and have a wrench like on the end of it, and you pull it out, you walk around and around like that, open it up. He said, well, I reckon I'll let you do it. He was teared to death, but because he didn't have to do it.
Right.
And a lot of those boats would come in from Newman down there, and they would tie up down there at the bridge, and
Yes.
the family would come pick them up, go to Newman, and Monday they would come back down there.
How old were you when you drove your first car, talking about your first automobile now, and actually got behind the wheel there?
Well, it was probably 1940 or 41, because my daddy never had a car till he was 1935, and this was 19. And the first car that I ever bought and my daddy bought together, I was 16 years old, and we bought it together, and it was 1934 Ford.
I'm gonna ask you this, and I'm gonna really strain you on this one. A 1934 Ford, what do you think it sold for?
Well, a friend of mine, Humphrey, he had a 1937, 38 Chevrolet, and if I see his brother right now, he can tell you exactly it was $700 and maybe $58.
But that was big money.
It's $78. A few years ago, I bought a car, and the sales tax on it more than what the automobile was.
Well, let me go back to the service years. How many years did you just take the service?
I went in at June of '44 and discharged June of '46.
Now, when you got there, that was a little different than the Army. I mean, it was 3 meals a day.
No, I was in the Navy.
Navy.
And they paid $54 a month. They had just raised it. You know, there's a song come out that I make $21 a day once a month.
Right.
Well, I made $54 a day once a month. They took the money out for laundry or insurance and stuff, and we got $40-some a month.
Mr. Kennedy, was that big money to you then compared to what you were
More
doing?
than I ever had.
That was big money. Could you spend it all?
No, because didn't have nowhere to go.
But that was a good thing.
I will tell you this, since you mentioned money. I went across on a transport.
Yes, sir.
Army transport. I was in the Navy and they were on the Navy ship. The only time I loaded supplies, I went on Navy ship. Then I went over on Army transport and come back on Army transport. And everywhere you looked on that ship, there was a poker game going on. Before we got to Guam, there was two men playing poker. They had won all the money on that ship, them two men.
Unbelievable.
You know, and then when I got at Guam and I went to the capital of Guam, Agana, and they were rebuilding the civilian hospital back. And what it was along Quonset Hut, I don't know whether you ever remember them.
I know Quonset Hut.
They were in them and everything. And the Marine Corps was the one that head of it.
Yes.
I was in the Navy. I ate at the mess hall of the Marine Corps and they paid it in the mess hall. And I went to get my pay and it was a whole lot more money than what I was supposed to have, and I told them I didn't get that much money. They said, we'll have a special payday. And they called me in a few days after then, and they gave me the money that they said on. And I took that money, it was about 6 months before I got a paycheck again.
Good gracious. Now, you spent the time in the Navy, you get discharged, and then what do you decide to do?
Get married.
Let me shake my head for just a second. Tell me about that. Now, you didn't just decide that. Now, you had to have something going. Tell me about that.
Well, I met my wife right after we come out of service, and we went together for maybe 12 or 15 months, and then got married. We farmed for about 5 years, and in the meantime, before I got that, though, I worked as back then the government would help me and pay to give your job and everything.
Right.
And they would pay part of the salary. And the man that I worked with paid me $25 a week.
A week. Now you're making $100 a month.
And I went to work at 7 o'clock and worked at 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Mr. Kelly, I got to stop you right there now. You've gone from $54 a month in the Navy to $100 a week.
A month. $100 a month.
$100 a month, $25 a week, $100 a month. That had to be, you had to have money just burning your pocket up.
I never had that.
Even at $25 a week.
But I don't know this, but in the 1950s, I understand, I was told that the average salary in Jones County was $1,800 a year.
In 1950.
In the early 1950s.
And take me through the years after that. Tell me about living in Jones County all those years. And of course, I look there, you people out there saying $54 a month. They're amazed at that. But then that was more than you made on the farm, and they're sitting there scratching their head going, but this is real stuff. So tell me about the years after that in Jones County.
Well, I've always been tight.
Let's say frugal.
Well, I try not to live above my income.
Yes, sir.
I've always tried to pay the debts and everything. And the Lord has blessed me. I've had a long life.
Jones County's been good to you.
Always, because if it hadn't been for the people, I couldn't have made it.
Good folks.
Because most of the time I work with the public.
Right.
And
That'll strain a man's nerves in a minute, won't it?
I said years ago that everybody get out of high school, they will be made to work for the public in 2 years, at least 2 years. So they
Some
know
of them
what-
would never make it, Mr. Kelly.
Know what the public is like and everything. We people are hard to deal with sometimes.
Yes.
We all have good days and we have bad days. I run business for about 28 years. And when I'm one of them, when I feel bad, everybody knows. They look at me and tell me. And this tourist man stopped there one morning and I had just opened up. I didn't feel good. He said, I don't ask you a question. I don't get upset. Do you look like that all the time in your life? I said, listen, I work 15 hours a day, sometimes you just gotta be yourself. You know, and, people, I've been blessed by running the business. The old timers come in and tell me things back in World War II or World War I.
Yes, sir.
And how it was then. And one of the daughters, I asked them, I said, do you remember what all said? She said, please tell me some of the things Daddy said. I do wish I had it written down and everything. And this is true. People in my generation, we have seen more changes in this world than any other generation has ever been.
Mr. Kennedy, I don't think my generation in my wildest dream could be the man that your generation is. You saw the Depression, you saw World War II, you saw this country go from what it was to what it is today. My generation is not the man that your generation is. I think your generation is, as Tom Brokaw says, the greatest generation. And I could argue that with anybody.
Well, my daughter was talking about it one day and everything, and what this world, how much we had changed and everything. I said, World War II changed it. Everybody before World War II, they more or less raised on the farm or close to the farm,
Right.
especially in North Carolina. And when the World War II come, all the boys went in service, and the women were left here to take care of us, and they went to factories and everything, and they got jobs, and they got all this money that coming in. When the boys come back, they didn't want to go back in the home where they were, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I wanted my children to have more than what I had had.
Yes.
And so we looked at the things of the world, that they could have the things and wouldn't have to go through what we went through with. And we've left out God and country. Our forefathers come here for we to have freedom of religion and speak and everything. And our forefathers our Constitution, our court system, was everything was based on God's word. And we have got away from that. Everybody worked for what they got. If you in the neighborhood and you got down and out, say your barn burnt down, all your neighbors stop and help you put that barn back together and build it in. They would help one another. And now everybody's for themselves. And we've got away from that family thing. We've got away from God. And our nation is based on the Bible and the truth. And now we have everybody's for itself.
Mr. Kennedy, I wish that this entire country had heard what you said in the last 2 minutes. I don't know of any other question I could ask you. I don't know of anything else I can say except amen. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here at this interview today. And it has just meant so much. And I hope our young people will listen to your words right there.
Well, we all can help if we just put our trust in the Lord and pray for our nation. If we pray, God is the only one who can change us, put us back to where we should be.
Mr. Kennedy, thanks for being here. We will continue on here in a few moments. We continue on with Jones County Heritage Days. I'm John Moore, and I do thank you for joining us today. And Miss Margaret Carol Banks is with us right now. And this is going to be more like a date than it is an interview because we got a lot in common. Miss Banks comes from a family of teachers. She taught. She understood the farm. She just had a desire and a passion for education. So I'm going to go back just as far as you want to go, and I want to talk about how in the world did you end up in Jones County?
My daddy and mama were both born in Jones County.
So you didn't have a whole lot of children.
My mama was a Mallard, and they have a heritage. Grandpa Mallard, I remember. He was in the 7th grade. I was in the 7th grade when he passed away. And my grandmother died a year before I started to school, grandmother Mallard. My grandpa Banks died when my daddy was more or less a young man. And so he became the father. His older brother was already married. And I don't know when his younger brother got married, but sometime while he was still staying at the family home. which is across from where my home is. And Daddy also helped in the store down near Jacksonville. So he didn't like pork and beans. He said he'd had enough of them, but he could always eat sardines.
Miss Banks, I'm gonna ask you this. Growing up in Jones County, did it get colder then bullshit it
Well,
does
seems
now? I
like
gotta
the
ask
year-
you that.
Seems like the year I was in the 5th grade, I was gonna freeze to death.
What year was that?
Well, I don't know.
You just remember the cold.
I was born in 1925.
1925.
And I was born in Jones County when I was born with a midwife. My daddy went for the doctor. When the doctor got there, I was already dressed and my daddy was sitting in the window, so I told him, it was February, it was
Right.
cold. And he was singing to me.
Miss Banks, let me ask you, I'm gonna ask you a lot of questions here now, so stay with me. Born in 1925, what do you remember about the Depression?
Well,
Let me ask you this.
I didn't know we were poor till I went to college my first year.
That's what I was gonna ask you. A lot of folks that worked on the farm, they didn't have a clue that
Well,
the Depression.
I didn't know, Mom and Dad were married in 23, big church wedding at 8 o'clock in the morning at Friendship.
Now, I ain't never heard of such a thing as a church and wedding in the morning. What was it?
Well, they were married at 8 o'clock in the morning. The lady that played the piano had dated my daddy also. And every Christmas she'd come the week before Christmas and leave on before Christmas Eve. And after Christmas she'd come back and stay till school opened again. Mom and she were very, very good friends. And my daddy was a good friend too.
How about that?
So that's part of my heritage. They built the house in 24. So then they moved in their own home and had me in 25.
So you had to be around, I don't know, 8, 9 years old during the Depression, and you say you didn't know it because there was always a lot of work on the farm.
Well, there was always something going on. You were either killing chickens, gathering eggs, making butter. I even milked a cow when I was in school some mornings at 4
When
o'clock
these
in the
little bitty
morning.
hands milked the cow.
Uh-huh.
Girl.
When Daddy had that violent headache,
Uh-huh.
he couldn't do anything for about 2 days. And so the cow still had to be milked. So he would get me up. I put up in the winter, I put on everything I owned that was dirty or old, so I wouldn't freeze when I milked the cow. But I got it lugged back to the house. Mama would be watching for me and help me, because she couldn't really leave Daddy during that time. But anyway, that was good. We had plenty of milk, we had plenty of butter, and during that time, we had a little mold that made the little sticks, like 4 sticks in a pound.
Yes, ma'am.
So we made butter and brought it, Daddy would bring it to Trum and swap it for things that we could use in the house, flour or whatever, from Mr. Roy Edwards here at Trum.
Now, going through school those years here, you were like 6 miles from Trenton and 6 miles from Pollocksville. So
And I went to Paulsville School.
and what time there in Pollocksville did you decide, I'm going to be a school teacher? When did you decide you want to do that?
Well, I didn't decide it till I did student teaching.
Okay.
I thought I wanted to be a home agent because I grew up being a 4-H club member.
Okay.
And we had an active Pollocksville youth group.
Okay.
So part of that time, I was president. I never was secretary. I didn't like to do all that.
So you were president of 4-H.
In the local level. But we put on radio shows. We went to Kinston and broadcast. We wrote our own programs. We gave our devotion, all that sort of thing. Sit right about every year for several years after, about 5th grade on through time.
How many people were in your graduating class?
About 25.
About 25. So you get to college, and you found out that you had lived through a depression. What did you say? Wait a minute.
Well, all these kids were talking about all they did, and I said, well, that can't be possible because I started handing tobacco as soon as I could reach the truck. I never did learn to loop. I never did drive a tobacco truck.
But you knew that when the summertime came, it was time to put it back, and the
Uh-huh.
fall times, you had to take it off and get it to the warehouse.
Right.
When you
But I
start,
was learning to drive a tobacco, so when I got on the school bus, 6 o'clock sometimes in the morning, didn't get home until dark at night. So it wasn't much time to work at drive-by.
But you got to college and you decided you wanted to be a school teacher. How many years did you teach school?
33 and 16.
33 years you taught school. Now, was your mom a school teacher?
Yes, sir.
Your mom taught school, and she taught till for forever too, did she not?
Then she got home until she got married.
Now, what did you teach?
I taught vocational home economics.
Home economics. Now, does that mean that you had an opportunity to teach people how to use a pressure cooker back in those days?
Yes.
I know the county agents used to travel around and show people how to do that.
I think I was at the first club meeting in Town, and it was at Miss Clarence Andrews' house.
Oh.
You went up a little lane, and it was in the summer, and they were tiptoeing some part of the canyon, and they did some other handwork, but I can't remember what. And I would go in from the kitchen to the porch. I remember that they didn't stop me from going in and out, because I was the only child there. And there were little animals, dogs and cats out that I went out to play with, but they were allowed into the house.
In another interview, I talked with Mr. Kennedy, and he said he was in the Navy and his pay was $54 a month.
I have no idea what my pay was when I started.
Didn't matter. You just want to teach school.
Well, after I did my student teaching, I knew I wanted to teach, because I had, right then, I knew the age level of the
Right.
high school, and it just worked fine.
But you taught in some other areas besides Jones County, right?
I never taught in Jones County.
You taught where?
I taught in Nash
Nash
County for a
County.
year and 6 tenths.
Okay.
And I taught 32 years in Lenore County, 16 at Southwood and 16 at South Lenore.
At Southwood. I know exactly where Southwood is.
I was the only teacher ever taught in there.
What would you say here's one for you. What would you say to young folks watching this that are saying, I think I want to be a school teacher? Now, go back when you taught to when it ended. Now, what would you say to folks that want to teach? Now, I got a son that's a teacher, so I'm going to make sure he hears this.
It determined on how you started that first day.
Uh-huh.
If you let them talk that first day, they expected to talk right on.
Right.
I had a homeroom that happened in my first day. And the third day, I said, now, did you all do this way last year? No, ma'am. I said, well, y'all won't do it the rest of this year either. I said, if you do, I will be your homeroom teacher. Oh, we'll be good, Miss Banks, and they were.
So you started out like you're going to hold that.
That's right.
You and I were sitting here earlier talking, and you asked me about strap molasses. There are a lot of folks. There folks don't have a clue what strap molasses is. Some of these young folks in here in their early 70s, they don't even know what I'm talking about. What is strap molasses?
Well, as you told me earlier, it was near the bottom of the
That's
barrel.
what I thought it was. Am I right on that?
I really do not know.
So we're going to have to go with my opinion.
I
of
have
what,
to go with your opinion on that.
growing up, what do you think one of your fondest memories of growing up in Jones County in the 1930s and 40s? And how about during those war years?
Going out to the hand tobacco, get up in the morning, put on my long sleeve shirt and my pants that I inherited from the next door neighbor across the road, the boy, and put on my straw hat, put a iced potato biscuit in, in my pocket for a snack, and walk down to the barn, and then come home for lunch and take another snack in the afternoon.
Man, that is unbelievable.
And I couldn't lift
The sticks.
the sticks, but somebody carried off my sticks.
Do you?
And when we talked tobacco, if I suckered, I was terribly sick.
See, I just can't imagine you suckering tobacco. I
Well,
just
I
can't.
didn't
Somebody
suck, I
is pretty.
talked.
I can't imagine you topping tobacco. Somebody as
They-
prim and proper as you.
They said, Mr. Todd, if you'll just let her talk, we'll suck her. Because they're gonna talk.
Did you realize that that was just that hard of work, or was it just everyday life?
It was fun.
Fun.
And then on Saturdays, I'd help break corn in the field for the animals. We had hogs, and cows, and the mules.
Well, what about on Sunday? Were there any gatherings where people would just gather and just say, "We ain't working today. We're through. We're gonna rest"?
Well, unless it was burning, unless it was feeding the fire for the tobacco barns, we pretty near had Sundays off.
So you would just,
We a lot of times eat at grandma's house, and then when grandma was gone, we'd eat at Uncle Ron's house.
well, what about gatherings of people, like at revivals and homecomings and
Oh,
stuff?
we had the best times at Friendship. I joined the church in about 1935, and all of us that were in it, our picture was made at the river from folks who were being baptized. And wouldn't you know, the Sunday I joined the church, I broke out with an earache, and they weren't gonna let me get baptized. So they finally let me pack my ears and put on a bathing cap. Now I am in the picture with that old bathing cap.
I can't imagine anybody telling you you're not gonna do anything. I just can't, that just
My mom
doesn't,
and dad did.
that just,
Let me tell you what.
that just doesn't seem right, somebody telling you this or that.
And before when I was about 3 years old, I wore little white overalls made out of feed sacks.
Yes, ma'am.
And my daddy was singeing the chicken, and I was in the yard. And
Wait a minute, hold back up, singeing the chicken, some folks don't know what that is. Our camera lady, she's over there going, what are you talking about?
Well, you had to get that little fine stuff off the chicken.
Okay,
You didn't rub it and scrape it like people do now, or you didn't send it through machines.
right.
But he was singeing, and all of a sudden here comes a breeze, and the fire wraps around my legs.
Good gracious.
I have never known what happened to that chicken, but I know could still daddy rolling me over the ground and said, and crying, saying, honey, I didn't mean for you to get hurt.
Bless your heart.
Bless your baby, come on, mama, come out here and help me get my baby right. He was having a time.
Were you had to be old enough, did you help with the hog killings back in the day?
No, I was at school.
Did you help with canning to work in the
Oh,
garden?
I was.
Tell me about that. Now, 'cause
Well,
most
you-
people think you go to the grocery store and
You
get
had
that.
to plant the seed, you didn't put out already
Right.
plants, and you had to keep them fertilized, and you had to keep them bugs off of them, and you had to keep them growing.
And you had to know about how much you had to do to get through the winter.
Well, you grew enough that you gave away food too.
Now, when you say gave away, does that mean like go to church and swap it with somebody?
No, you just, everybody pass by would stop and say, those certainly are pretty collars, Clyde, and you could go break 4 or 5 and they'll take them on.
Let me ask you, going back when back in the day when the United States launched a rocket. You remember those days and how you felt about that on the first when you used to see the airplanes coming in to the Cherryport Camp Machine? Tell me about those days when you would see those coming over Trenton.
When the airplanes would come to Oak Grove, I had gone to college, so I only knew it from a few days in the summer. I went to college, I wanted to major in math and home ec,
Right.
and they wouldn't let me have a math major.
Why?
Well, it just wasn't done in those days.
Are you telling me that they would not let you do it because you were a female?
Well, no, it was just that math didn't go with vocational home economics.
Okay, I got you.
So I had to major in science, it was out of history, and dates and names didn't stick with me.
Still don't with me?
So that was out. But I was still trying to get that major in math when I went to Greensboro.
Yes,
to
ma'am.
Woman's college, educate a woman, and you educate a man, you educate an individual. You
Right.
educate a woman, and you educate a family.
Right.
It just still through.
Okay. I will remember that.
Okay. But anyway, when I went there, that's where I learned I was poor.
How did you get there? You take a train or bus?
Oh no, my daddy took me. My last year in school, 1942, near the end of it, my mama was very sick.
Right.
But we had a cousin who was in the hospital in Newbern, and Daddy would go about 3 times in the night and during the day to be there, but she had to get her bad shots.
Right.
And he'd hold her hand and talk to her. But he had done that all the time when we get our vaccinations, for which we went to the health department in Newbern for whatever we were vaccinated for as we grew up. Because Jones County didn't have a health department.
Right.
But now then we do, so
Right.
people come there. But Daddy had to take Mama back to Duke,
Right.
and so he got the trailer, which is the farm trailer, and 5 of us went to Greensboro. classmate of mine, and a cousin of mine who was a classmate. There were 3 of us, and the other 2 were here in Trinidad.
Miss Banks, you didn't come on for Christmas or Thanksgiving, I mean, did you
Oh,
stay
well,
there?
I was not coming home when we got our first 6 weeks.
Right.
Because I had classes on Saturday. None of them did. But Norma had told them she just couldn't leave me up there. So Mom and Daddy had written special that I could leave, and Norma had our tickets and took by taxi our suitcases to the bus station. And I was supposed to get on the trolley at the corner on the college.
Yes, ma'am.
When I got there, the trolley was full, and I'm a poor runner and a poor walker. But I kept up with that trolley to get on the bus, and we had to come through Farmville.
Oh, whoa, now we're talking about my hometown.
I know, and that bus station was just a little service station.
Yes, it was.
And at 9 o'clock, he told us he had to close up, because he had to go to church on Sunday.
And left you standing there?
He put us on the street. We sat back to back on our suitcases. But he did let us call Kinston and tell them where we were and why we were late, because the bus had come.
Right.
But we got there about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning.
My gracious.
But anyway, we were late because the bus waited for 3 sailors, that would be their last leave
Right.
in 1942, the fall of 42. So that was just the beginning of the war, so it was at its worst.
Miss Banks, tell me about the war years in Jones County. When people you knew, people you grown up with, they'd gone to the
Yes.
war. Tell me about the war
I
years.
all these boys went off and left us. One of the cousins, one that was, his wife was so sick.
Right.
Well, after she died, a month later, they drafted him and sent him off. He hadn't even got his things straight. But it was rough.
Growing up, and all those years
We
we talked,
lost one cousin.
one cousin. The fun stuff. What do you remember? People sitting there watching us now, they would think about all the hard work.
Well,
and just,
in growing up, the first radio that I remember was at one of Daddy's sisters. He had
is this one of
3.
these big radios
No, it was about that tall and sat on some.
on the table?
Well, on something in it.
Okay.
Anyway, we go down there and this little avenue and all those sort of things. But,
Now that's funny because I remember seeing the tapes of these years ago when you could buy them on DVD. I've got just a little time left. You have been through the Depression. You went through the war. You went to college. You were a long way from home. What would you say to the young people or anybody watching us talk today? What
get
would-
as much education as you can, take care of yourself, eat good food, get a lot of sleep.
Get a lot of sleep. I feel like I have been on a date
And
today.
in my 3rd grade, one of our students, the first half, had scarlet fever.
I forgot about those years.
And when school ended, the next day, I came down with scarlet fever.
Bless your heart.
They're the only 2 cases registered in North Carolina that year.
Well, I'm glad you're with us today. Miss
Me
Margaret
too.
Carol Banks has been with us. This has been
I
like
got to
a
talk
date.
about my mama and daddy a minute.
Well, let me just do this real quick. I'm gonna let you do it real quick, but I want to get a picture. I cannot imagine you milking a cow. That's what I'm gonna take away from this interview. I just can't. Tell me about your mom and dad real quick.
Well, the year I was so sick, Mama was district president of the all the home demonstration in this district.
Uh-huh.
And it was at Atlantic Beach.
Uh-huh.
So you see, I looked forward to that.
Right.
I missed that. But then they did let me get out the day of our picnic at Jones County. And that was the 4th Thursday in June every year.
How about that?
And we also had rally day at our church.
Right.
That was in the fall. And then, at our picnics, they sold ice cream and
Ooh.
drinks and that sort of thing. And we did the same thing at rally day, but they made their own chicken salad and different things
I
right
know.
there at the church. Everybody brought their food cooked, but it was all made together that day. And you could get that sort of thing in there. So that was when we had rally day. And then growing up, my daddy's hogs got some certificates for being good animals. And before I was started to school, and he was gonna be honored one time, they wouldn't let me go. He said, well, you just have to send me my certificates. I know they let me go. It was up on Mr. Edwards'
I can't imagine anybody telling you anything you
well,
couldn't do.
they told my daddy, he said, well, because I hadn't even started school then.
Bless your heart.
But I went to sleep at that meeting. When I woke up, I had a long pencil. It was one of those great big rounders.
Well, Miss Margaret Carol Banks has been our guest, and I still cannot imagine this very charming, gentle lady milking a cow, but it was just a part of life. We'll continue on, and thanks for joining us in Jones County Heritage
Thank
today.
you. Could tell you a lot of stories.